everyone, and welcome to the PMO Virtual Summit. We have an exciting guest here with us today, Mark Price Perry. Mark, how are you?
I'm fine. Thank you for asking. How are you?
I'm doing great, thanks. Mark, before we get started, I just want to go ahead and take a moment and tell everyone listening and watching us today a bit about you, and we can get right into the meat of our conversation. I'm pleased to introduce Mark Price Perry. Over a 37-year career, Mark has managed PMOs and has had PMOs serve him as a member of the leadership team. And as a PMO setup and management consultant, Mark has helped over 250 PMOs in over 50 countries. Mark is the author of the Business Driven PMO book series, which of course includes Business Driven PMO setup and management, Business Driven project portfolio management, and business-driven PMO success stories. And here today, we're going to be talking about PMO leadership as a profession. Mark, I know that you and I, and as well as a few others, have been talking a bit about PMO leadership as a profession and how it's panning out in North America relative to elsewhere around the globe, especially compared to Europe. And frankly speaking, we're a bit frustrated and concerned in the direction that it's heading out. And how many times have you heard someone say, hey, you know what? I really want to become a PMO leader. And how many times have we actually heard people say, you know what, Gert, I have actually landed up in the PMO role accidentally. And frankly speaking, that's been my story too. But, you know, we're way into PMOs now, right? There's a massive sample size of work that's been done. Why is it that we keep on stumbling upon ourselves and still have that statistic that really haunts me? 50% of PMOs fail within 3 years, right? That's really like saying, I'm going to flip a coin and maybe it's going to fail, maybe it's going to succeed. What are your thoughts, Mark?
Well, that's a good way to tee up a discussion about PMO leadership as a profession, PMO management as a profession. Gosh, what do I think about all that? Well, I have a few thoughts. So let me share some of them with you. First, it seems whenever a discussion about PMO leadership or PMO management as a profession starts, the conversation tends to get way too noisy. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It seems that
I've seen some of those.
Yeah, folks get so worked up about whether PMO management can or cannot be called a profession that they lose sight of the intent of the discussion. I and almost every PMO manager and executive I know would like to see workplace professionals that lead PMOs identify as a body, share ideas, contribute thought leadership to help others and improve how PMOs are run, how they're set up, how they're managed. And, in describing the body professionals that lead a PMO, I absolutely have no problem using the phrase PMO leadership profession or PMO management profession. I actually agree with the argument that PMO management and PMO leadership is not a profession, but so what? Lots of things are called a profession that aren't. It's a distinction these days without a difference, and it's a very silly argument to spend time on. So that's my first complaint. In the last 15 years, I've probably been part of, I would say maybe 5 or 6 discussion groups in the various forums, and I'm just so off-put by the commentary that rather than discussing the merits of the premise, we get into this discussion about you can't call it that. Here are 22 reasons why. And for me, that misses the whole point of it all. So that's my first observation. And my sense is that other people share that observation. So let me ask you, where do you come down on the fence? Are you offended if someone uses the term PMO leader profession or PMO leadership as a profession?
Not at all. In fact, I'm all for it, to be honest, Mark, because I feel that, yes, I do agree with you to the point that profession from a, if you take the word profession from a dictionary perspective and then start outlining whether it hits all the check boxes or not, maybe not, but the point is, you look at any sort of search engine out there, job search engine out there, and you just hit PMOs, or you hit PMO director, or you hit VP of PMOs, or you hit PMO manager, no matter what the role is, you get a ton of those listings. And if that isn't enough to classify those various titles as a role and a profession, then I don't know what does, right? And I think it's also time to sort of realize that times are changing, right? Some things that we didn't even expect to be popular or to be more than just a one-time role that spun out itself within a company. Those are actually professional now, right? The one thing that comes to my mind is with the advent of social media, the whole concept of a community manager, right? If you have a Facebook community, if you have any other social media community, those community managers are full-time roles, and that is turning out to be a profession because lots of companies need it. Small, mid-sized, large-sized organizations, all of them need it. In fact, large-sized organizations need an army of community managers to make sure that their millions of fans or followers, whatever have you, their needs are being met, their questions are being answered, they're being loved and pampered. And so, with that, PMO leaders are out there all over the world. And so I would actually say that not calling PMO leadership as a profession is sort of a disrepute to all the work that's being done by so many PM leaders out there.
Well, you and I certainly drink from the same side of a teacup on this one. So parking that aside, and I don't disrespect people who have a different view. I just think, well, it kind of reminds me of the time I had this big bowl of ice cream and came into the living room to sit down and watch a football game. And my wife walked by and she saw it and she said, and she was pointing at my stomach. She said, "You need to lose about 5 or 10 pounds." And I looked at her and I said, "That's not fat, that's muscle." And she looked at me and said, "You can call it what you want. We both know what it is." And so that to me is like the PMO management profession. I don't care what the label is. We all know that people are PMO leaders and PMO managers. There are people that want to hire them, that want to have them set up and manage organizations for them. And there are people that aspire to be one. So let's get over the term. So now with respect to the premise of a vibrant and active PMO leader profession, would anyone care? Well, I, for one, am fairly confident that the answer to that would be yes. And yes, for a wide variety of reasons. But I come from this from a different perspective than some of the other folks that I know you're interviewing. So can I tell you about my reasons why I care?
Absolutely.
So I'm glad you're going to allow me to say my reasons, because otherwise this would be a very damn short interview. So anyway, I'm very passionate about line of business project management and line of business PMOs. Some people refer to line of business project management as informal or accidental project management and informal and accidental PMOs, but there's nothing informal or accidental about it. This is where the different perspectives of project management people and business people really come to light. For example, take a merger and acquisition project, an M&A project. To project people, an M&A project is a project to consolidate the financial systems of two companies that have just merged.
Right.
To business people, however, a merger and acquisition project is the actual merger or acquisition itself. So you tell me, what's the more important project, the actual merger or the back office work that follows? See what I mean?
That's a tough one to answer, Mark.
No, it's pretty easy to answer. The business project, the actual project effort to do the due diligence, to do the research, to do all the work to negotiate valuation, that's infinitely more important than the back office work of consolidating
Absolutely.
financial systems and consolidating data, systems. So I could say the same thing for about, let's take sales, for example. To project people, a sales kind of a project is a project to implement a Salesforce automation system, such as Salesforce. To business people, a sales project is an actual sale. So what's more important, the project effort to implement an SFA tool, or the hundreds, perhaps thousands of projects within marketing, sales, business development, services, support, SFA tool to manage their line of business project-related work? And I could go on with human resources, HR systems versus HR line of business projects. The list is so big. And when I work with leadership teams, especially leadership teams that are talking about maturing formal back office project management capabilities like an EPMO, IT PMO, strategic PMO, I often ask them, consider those back office PMOs you have. And I hope that term is not offensive. I just mean to use back office as a way to compare EPMOs, enterprise PMOs, that is, strategic PMOs, IT PMOs, that kind of enable and improve the business versus line of business projects that are, the projects and PMOs that are in the lines of the businesses that are never part of the EPMO, IT PMO, or SPMO, and never should be. So don't get me wrong, the formal projects of the back office are very important, but I got to tell you, I maintain and advocate, and most leadership teams agree with me when I talk them through it, that the informal line of business projects, collectively, all of them, are far more valuable and critical to the organization than the formal portfolio projects found within, an enterprise PMO or IT PMO. So don't get me wrong, the collective projects of the formal back office PMOs are very, very, very important. But I got to tell you, I've seen companies lose half their value when but one informal business project went south. And conversely, I've seen companies achieve tremendous success when a line of business project is carried out in such a manner, and line of business projects are carried out successfully and better than the competition. But regrettably, the project management industry seems to be stuck in a rut and only focused on the formal back office projects and PMOs. Sure, they've been dragged into Agile reluctantly, but the formal project management industry, are really nowhere to be found when it comes to advice, guidance, practices, and dare I say, bodies of knowledge for the line of business projects and PMOs that exist in every nook and cranny throughout the organization. So I see tremendous opportunity for informal line of business projects and PMOs, and that is where the project management office, PMO leader professional, and where PMO management profession and PMO leadership profession becomes highly of interest to me, because it's my belief that standards organizations like PMI will never be able to coerce or exploit line of business professionals that aren't full-time project managers and don't ever plan to be a full-time project manager to get a PMP. It's just not going to happen. I mean, years back, there were application extensions to the PMBOK and communities of practice initiatives that held the promise of expanding out to these groups. But quite frankly, none of that panned out. So the idea of a PMO management profession or a PMO leadership profession, in my view, offers a tremendous opportunity for PMO management practitioners, not standard organizations, but the actual practitioners to collaborate, to share, to improve the profession, but not just improve it, to widen and grow it. So to me, this means that project management and PMOs will not be viewed and limited to back office formal PMOs and plan-driven techniques, but to all kinds of projects and all kinds of PMOs throughout the entire organization, and all kinds of project techniques, not just plan-driven techniques like waterfall or PMBOK, but techniques patterned after complex adaptive systems as well. So that's my passion, and that's my hope for the idea of PMO leadership as a PMO leadership profession, PMO management profession. It's a far cry different than the usual project management industry buzz. PMBOK versus Agile, waterfall versus bimodal IT, strategic versus enterprise, the change management office, the Agile management office. Don't get me wrong. All of that, the usual project management industry buzz, is very important to know and to get right. But I see lots of folks. I see lots and lots of folks pushing on those marshmallows already. I see far fewer people addressing line of business projects, line of business PMOs. So it's a unmet need. There's a lot of unmet needs, and it's an unmet need with an opportunity-rich environment, but not a certification-rich environment. So hence, it has to be practitioner-based. And so that's why I believe that a PMO management profession of practitioners is a tremendously good idea. And I wish we'd get off this noisy discussion of whether or not, PMO management is a profession. I mean, does that make sense? How are we doing? Is my line of business project management and PMO passion making sense, or am I just talking circles?
No, I think it makes a lot of sense, Mark. And I think what I want to do is I want to talk about three specific sort of target markets, if you will, or target audiences, and what they can really take away from this, right? And so I want to go ahead and direct that specifically to you. So I mean, I think first let's talk about what does all of this mean for those three specific target audiences, and then let's talk about what can we do, all of us, not just you and I, but everyone who's watching and viewing this conversation. What can we do to get to that vision that you have in mind? So number one, we have aspiring PMO leaders, Mark. We have first-time PMO leaders, and I think in an audience that is explicitly of my specific interest is the executive or a PMO leader at a company that's around 7 to 10 years old. It's come out from its startup hustle mode. It's growing big. It's growing fast. It needs to get out of that hustle mode and now focus towards predictable, consistent results, aka needs some sort of governance and strategy. It needs some sort of governance to make sure that their strategy is hit in a way that it doesn't burn out its company and that its growth remains sustainable. So again, first-time PMO leaders, aspiring PMO leaders, and executives or PMO managers at these kind of companies. What does looking at PMOs, PMO leadership as a profession, PMO management as a profession mean for them? Because a lot of the stuff that they read online or in books doesn't talk about any of this. What does all of this mean for them? Why should they even care about this, Mark?
Well, that's a real good point. I mean, I have slightly a different view. I mean, you categorize people who want to be a PMO leader, first-time PMO leaders, and then what I call the experienced or more advanced PMO leader. And that's a good way to look at it. That looks at it from the perspective of the person. I tend to look at it more organizationally from the perspective of where in the organization is there a business need to address project-related issues and opportunities. And project management is ubiquitous, hence those needs are ubiquitous. And then where in the organization, hence because there's a project need, there is a PMO of some kind need. I've seen a lot of PMOs that the PMO and the PMO manager think they're in that latter category you described of, hey, we've been at this 7 to 10 years, we're highly mature. And when I talk to them after about 15 minutes, not only I declare, but they agree that they're highly immature. They've advanced practices, they've advanced methodologies and tools without any real PMO mandate or PMO purpose. And they've kind of gotten to the point that the gearbox is really tuned, but so what? The gearbox is tuned, but they're not at the table. They're not really involved with the leadership team on connecting the project portfolio to the needs of the business by way of the corporate strategy. And that's okay, because it could be that the leadership team doesn't need it, or it does. So my premise is the PMO is driven by what the leadership team needs. So there's this implied, what are the ends to be achieved, and therefore the PMO will be the servant leadership function, the means to the ends. But having said that, no organization is the same.
Right.
So that's kind of my concern, or I shouldn't say my concern, I should say that's my passion, is that PMO management should be viewed much more ubiquitously. It shouldn't be limited to just a PMO that helps the leadership team with strategy. In fact, I even heard a presentation where this person, who I believe is a total moron, was advocating that if the PMO doesn't report high in the organization, it's not important. And quite frankly, I not only find that intellectually dim-witted, I find it pretty damn offensive, because my very first PMO experience was 7 levels down from the CEO of our company. And it was at a branch office level. And we were one of 250 PMO, one of 250 branches that had almost the exact same business conditions. But the branch manager, who was very insightful, decided to start a PMO to address some issues. And to make a long story short, we finished first out of 250 branch offices with very similar conditions. And the PMO that was established was credited as being a key driver of that. And to no discredit to the back office PMOs of the company I was with, I can't think of a single back office project that helped me one iota with our business objectives we had at the branch level. So I am offended when I keep hearing this push that PMOs have to be strategic. They have to report up high. They have to be involved with setting strategy of the leadership team and then enabling that strategy with a proper portfolio. Don't get me wrong. There are some organizations that need to do that, but there's a lot that the leadership team doesn't need it. And there's a lot of organizations that have projects that are permeated into every nook and cranny of the organization. And I find it absolutely ridiculous to spend so much time on these back office PMOs when you might have a line of business project that can cost a company half of its value if it goes south, yet there's not a single person in the organization that cares about it. And that's why I believe, I hate to go on a tangent, but you really got me going with that. You ask really good questions, but that's why I believe the concept of the chief project officer, which was a great concept about 10 years ago, fell completely flat, because rather than being a organizational wide type of role like a chief talent officer or a chief whatever else you call it, security officer, the people that were pushing on the chief project officer, some in the vendor community, some in the standards and others, some in the research groups like Gartner and others, what they were really describing was the chief project officer was an enterprise PMO that reported to the C-level. but the scope of it was really limited to enterprise projects and programs that are relative to the strategy execution. And I can't think of anybody better to talk about that than Andy Jordan. And I agree with every word that he says, and he's right, but it's just something that I don't care that much about, because I'm far more interested in, once you get that transformation or change management project or program done, how are the people in the field going to meet their business objectives each and every day through project-related work that they're doing. And it just drives me crazy when people talk about maturity in terms of maturing the capabilities of the back office PMOs, and they think that, hey, we got to level 3, we're going to go to level 4, and they think they've done a good job, when the line of business PMOs that have really important projects are kind of winging it ad hoc. I mean, you're lucky if they do some basic plan, do, check, act, dimming wheel stuff, or if they sit in a circle and put up a bulletin board and find their way into doing principles of complex adaptive systems. Some of the biggest benefit in project management as a application of management systems behavior is out there in the lines of business, but it has a complete blind spot for obvious reasons. PMI and others will never be able to exploit a PMP out of that domain. Vendors like CA and others are never going to be sell a large system in that domain. Consulting research firms like Gartner Group are never going to be able to sell white papers in that domain. So for that reason and more, a PMO management profession of active and vibrant practitioners, in my view, will not only get the traditional PMO better and better and better for people who aspire to be a PMO manager, for people who are doing it for the first time, and for people who have done it for 7 or 10 years, but it will broaden the whole concept of PMO management to an organization that manages a PMO of some kind, responsible for projects of some kind. So I'm with you lockstep on the 3 categories you laid out.
Yeah.
But I see it just a little bit differently in terms of aspirants and starter outers and people who have been at it for a long time, because my concern is we'll still be in a very narrow, myopic view, getting better in all 3 of those categories, but we won't be broadening that myopic view to a ubiquitous view. Does that make sense?
That makes a lot of sense, Mark. That makes a lot of sense. And I think, for me, it all comes down to one point, right? It doesn't matter where you are compared, where your PMO is compared to an industry perspective, is really where your organization needs you to be, right? I usually tell people is that if your PMO is more or less mature, then your organization is going to fail. It has to be exactly at the same level of quote unquote maturity, right? So basically, that means you do what your organization needs you to do. Once you've done that, let's figure out and explore more opportunities. What else? What else are the pain points of the organizations? Because, like everything, the changes, the needs of the organization will also change, and therefore, the PMO's purpose and the reasons for it to exist and the things that it should do then should also change with that. Uh, Mark, question for you based on all of this. Where do you think this is happening right? Is it happening right at all anywhere?
When you say where do you think, are you talking about PMO as a profession type activities?
Yes.
Boy, that's a great question. Yeah, it's very frustrating to see how well um, the PMO management profession is advancing in the UK and in Europe, and how difficult it is for the US and other places, but in particular the US, to do similar activities. Um, so, I know that there are a couple of organizations and participants that have been regularly getting together to promote the PMO management profession. And it's really frustrating because some of us, myself, Andy Jordan, Jesse Fuel, Dave Pryor, some of us from the United States over the last 3 or 4 or 5 years have been invited, to go to some of these UK-based PMO practitioner events and venues, and there's just such a buzz over there right now in terms of collaborating, advancing the profession. And it's not about implementing tools or getting certifications. I mean, that's all part of the process as well, but it's really about connecting practitioners up and sharing what is working in terms of PMO setup and management, uh, and how can we work with leadership teams better? How can we achieve better PMO outcomes? Uh, how can we have less of the false starts? Many PMOs have a false start initially, rather than, determining what the value is, they rush into people, process, and tools. And that's followed by, I don't know, maturity and other kinds of things. And usually it takes 2 or 3 or 4 iterations for an average PMO to really, get in that, hey, we're doing what the leadership team wants. So I see a lot of the PMO management community of professionals in Europe are really doing a fine job of sharing experiences, and a lot of the first-time PMO managers are avoiding some of the common pitfalls. Now, by way of comparison, I've been in over the last 10 years, as I mentioned before, nearly a half dozen discussions about advancing the idea of a PMO management profession that is practitioner based in terms of volunteers and people to establish and best practices, techniques, but more importantly, to meet regularly. And every single time the discussion has come up, people can't seem to get over the terminology. They get so caught up on, well, PMO management is not a profession. A profession is if you're a certified engineer and there's a body that manages and oversees and audits your certification, and on and on and on. And like we discussed before, I don't care what you call it. Either you want to collaborate as a group and try to make things better, or you don't. And to no discredit to PMI, they have a focus on PMO. Obviously, they do a PMO symposium, and it's right, and what it's seeking to do, I think it's doing a good job. But I don't think it's doing a great job. And the reason I don't think it's doing a great job is because I don't think it's broad enough. I think it's still too myopic. It's still too centered around PMI standards, and PMI bodies of knowledge. and such things, and industry thinking around, again, strategic PMOs, enterprise PMOs, change management, business transformation, all very important, but there's not one iota of discussion or value to other executives in the organization. If you're an executive responsible for marketing or sales or one of these functions, what value do you get out of the PMO? Okay, fine. The PMO, the back office PMOs do transformational projects, or they do IT projects that keep IT infrastructure up, or they do application projects to upgrade or bring in new systems. Fine, 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 and more fine. But aside from that, what do they really do to help a sales executive achieve revenue, profit, and customer sat? To help all those people in the organization that have project-related work to do it better. I remember once, I'm not going to mention the airline, but there was a person at an airline that went to the PMO that said, I got some projects to manage. I'm developing some capabilities for our business function. You're the PMO, and my manager asked me to come to you to get some advice. And the PMO manager gave him a copy of Microsoft project and said, you can learn this and use it if you want, but we're not involved with your projects. I mean, that to me is the exact problem with the project management industry and PMO thinking, is that it's almost as if we're here to do our stuff. And what you're doing, well, that shouldn't even be called a project. So I think that's a real interesting quagmire. But again, I see that as a tremendous opportunity. And in Europe, in the UK, based upon the efforts of, Lindsay Scott and many, many other people, they're broadening out. They're having those discussions. So again, I would like to see that to be something that practitioners in the US can independently from standards organizations like PMI, from the vendor groups, from the research analyst groups, offer a different voice that's not biased by certifications we want to sell or tools we want to implement or the latest buzzwords of thinking, but that is truly practitioner based and is centered upon how do we have success in the PMO domain. And I think that is something that only practitioners can take up.
So there are a couple of things that come to my mind there, Mark. So number one, it's the perception of what a PMO can do, not what a PMO is, but what a PMO can do, and have that firm belief that PMO can be that within an organization, right? So to your point, it's there to help organization achieve their business goals, whatever those are, and not just manage on time, on budget projects. So that, from a practitioner's perspective, that has to be self-ingrained. And once that self-ingrained is there, it needs to sort of be contagious through them within their organizations, and for them to adopt that belief, and therefore at that point in time be able to convey and realize the true potential of what a PMO can achieve. That's number one. The second thing that I see here is that every learning opportunity, especially in North America, is tied to some sort of a validation, right? So it's either a validation by a certification or some sort of a validation because a job requires it, right? But there's no investment of self-learning within themselves, right? There's, unless it's tied to, let's learning a PDU or getting a certification, the movement of learning towards just to get improved, improving yourself and improving the PMO as a whole in the organization, I see that far and few in between. I think that's something that where the UK and Europe are doing amazingly well, right? I mean, because why are these happening? Why are so many events that you alluded to, Mark, earlier happening? Is because people are coming to them, right? And those discussions are healthy, and people are taking away from them. There is no more, accreditation or reward associated with them, but just learning developing that fantastic network, and learning from each other. And I think that's missing as well. I think all of the people who are listening and hearing us right now, I think that's a big takeaway, right? What are we doing to invest in our own selves, invest in our learning, and hence investing in the improvement and benefit of the PMO without any other sideline but to sort of grow the value of the PMO? And I think so. My question there, Mark, for you then is, uh, what are some of the ways you think can help us achieve that mind shift, not only in terms of the changing the perception of what a PMO can do, but also people investing in their own education and learning?
Well, that's a real good question. And you promised me you're going to give me easy questions. So what the hell went with your promise? But seriously, I think a lot can be learned by reflecting upon the agile movement. There was a time when some developers were really unhappy about the status of software development and software development project management, but mostly software development. And so you had some folks get together at a ski resort out in the Rockies, and that work that a handful of passionate people did, led to a manifesto. And then that work led to other things, and that work led to other things. And then you had organizations and memberships. And then at some point in time, you not only had information that's codified in some principles and practices, you had a certification. And then half the people were really upset because that was kind of what they're trying to get away from, and now you're certifying and proceduralizing and processing exactly the type of behaviors that we don't want to do. And then, of course, there are some refinement and adjustments along the way. I think in many ways the PMO management profession or these type of activities would be very similar. So I think what would have to happen, and I think this is some of what happened in Europe, is there has to be a big enough critical mass of people to put together, some kind of whether you call it a manifesto or something else. Now, the group in Europe put together a manifesto, and maybe we just take theirs. So one approach is there has to be a view of what such a membership-based organization would be, and why you would want to join it. So in my view, I'm all too happy to piggyback on what's been successfully done in other places. I don't think you need to recreate the wheel. And maybe you just have a sister organization. But to me, it's all about a different voice, in that what's been so successful in Europe, in the UK, largely driven by Lindsay Scott, and in Europe as well, is they've established a voice. So it's a voice that's not based upon this is Prince 2 and come to Prince 2 training and get certified. Now we're going to have a conference on Prince 2, or this is a other institutional event that has a bias on account of the sponsor. So I think the key thing was, it's not about a certification. It's about practitioner passion. And should a certification come of it, you might have an opportunity to have that discussion. And I suspect if you did, there'll probably be a contingent of group people that says, we need to have a basic certification that will validate the profession, as well as serve as a mark that, leadership teams and others will be able to, view and distinguish those that are part of it from those that aren't. And then you're going to have another group of people say, no, I don't think a certification is necessary because this is really not the intent of the program. And as soon as you make it a certification, you're going to lose a lot of people that want to have the value and is sharing and learning, but have no professional need or desire to get a certification. But it's always a fair discussion to have, and it shouldn't be off-putting to the point that it kills the initiative,
Right.
if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
So I don't have a good answer for you. I'm a big fan of partnering with others that have successfully figured it out. So I would like to piggyback on some of the great work that's been done in the UK and in Europe, and to further their initial work to sign up with the manifesto they've created. I mean, I think I've signed their PMO manifesto. It's similar to the Agile manifesto. It makes a lot of sense. It's not meant to be inflexible or rigid. It's very open and makes a lot of sense. It's independent of any type of bias you'd expect to find, such as,
Right.
the biases that come from the groups that have existing certifications. So I would like to think that maybe there's enough critical mass in other regions of the theaters, like Asia Pacific, Latin America, North America, to say, why don't we take the great work that's been done already in the UK and Europe, and then tee up different regions, and there's people that are already doing it, but they're not connected. I mean, I can't think of anyone better than Americo Pinto down in Brazil to kind of lead this for South America. I can think of a dozen people or more, that would be for North America, and likewise for Asia Pacific. So it's, if you think of a maturity model, you can almost say what we're talking about already exists. It's just that it's a very low level of maturity.
Right. Right.
And we need to get it from like 0 to 1, and then maybe work to go from 2. So, and the sad part is, each and every day we don't. Let me tell you what's going to happen. Each and every day we don't get this thing going better. 2 things are going to happen. Well, a lot of things are going to happen, but 2 things very clearly. One, you're going to lose a lot of perspective and thought leadership from the old folks that are retiring, that have no ability to pass on a career's worth of experience.
Right.
And another thing that's going to happen is, for the new people coming in, they will have no ability to benefit from others in their career's worth of experience.
Right.
And I'll just to summarize how frustrating this is, there was one particular person in our last little discussion group exchange that was adamant against this. And that's fine. He was very noisy, perhaps more noisy than the most. And the sad part of it all is that this person is a brilliant person that's had probably over 30 years of experience. But I can promise you one thing: there's not a damn person that's a new PMO manager that even knows who this person is. Why? Because there's no PMO management profession. So the very critic of the PMO management profession is someone that could greatly benefit by having a place to deposit his wisdom and experience and all that he's contributed over the years. And then other people could benefit coming into it. But he and many people like him are kind of the reason why these moments of opportunity often fall flat, because you get too much resistance. So I don't mean to be disrespectful. I just mean to suggest that, in my opinion, as someone who's been at this for a while, there's a lot of interest in doing something like this regionally throughout the normal geographies across the world. There's a lot of people already doing stuff. And I think that what's been going on in the UK and Europe is tremendous. And I wish we could get that spread out regionally, and then connect it all up and advance the profession, advance the PMO leadership profession.
I think that sounds like a plan, Mark. That does. And I think that is something really for all our viewers and listeners to take away from, right? Is to actively seek out that thing that doesn't exist where they are, but it's out there somewhere. So for instance, for this situation, if you're not finding these things in North America or Latin America or Asia Pacific, then go to where you can find them, the UK. Look up some people, look at practitioners who are doing it there, doing it successfully, see what you can learn from them, bring it across the pond on this side, or even better, help us and others lead the way in making it happen. Mark, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts and perspectives on PMO leadership and PMO management as a profession.
Hussein, thank you for having me. The pleasure is all mine.
Bye-bye.
Okay, bye-bye.